Now we're going to start the UNT. It's going to give us a brief update on kind of what the research showed and give their story. I would like to introduce Dean Thomas Evenson from University of North Texas. He was leading the research team, and he's going to lead this discussion. He's an associate professor in the Department of Rehabilitation, Social Work, and Addictions, and former department chair, previously served.
I'm here to represent UNT, the University of North Texas, and to introduce the researchers that have been so engaged, very heavily engaged in this study. This was a big study for them. And to express our appreciation for being included, because these so many things happen at a university. They're representing us, participating in the community on behalf of UNT and on behalf of their own interests and research interests. As so often happens with research, people get immersed in it and they get excited about what they're learning, what they're discovering new information, turning it into knowledge and turning it into to understanding. And that's what's happening here. And as has been said several times, this is a first step. In some ways, this is the easiest step. And that is what is out there, getting the data. But it may also be the most important step because it's getting the momentum going. Now that we know something, we can grab onto it and move forward. It's exciting for me personally to have this research and to be in this position on behalf of UNT, because this is a university that wants to be part of the community. And much of our mission is focused on strengthening the community, not just staying in our walls at a university and taking care of our own interests and research interests, but actually making that research impact the community and strengthen the community. And there isn't a much better example of that than the Blight to Light initiative that this represents. And I'm so personally pleased and proud of our researchers for the role that they're playing in this. It reminds me of what the mayor just said about the plantation analogy with South Dallas. For a long time, higher education has had there's been a perception of they're out there. They're not really part of the community. We have to dispel that myth. We are part of the community, and I want to add to his partnership list of private citizens in the public sector and how do we get them to work together. Let's include the universities and colleges in that as well. This is a great example of how universities can do our part. We can't do it all, but there are parts of it that we can do. The instrument that was developed, the information that was developed as a result of this is a good example of that. But there are many other ways at the universities that we just partner together and say, this is a big problem, we can't solve it by ourselves, let's do it together. That's how progress is going to be made. And that's one thing that if I get up here for a second, I want to say that. We're ready to partner. We're not ready to lead it and control it. We're ready to partner with people like Habitat for Humanity. This is a classic example of how that works. It's now my pleasure, and if you would come up here as I call your names so that we can get started with this, to introduce our 5 researchers that have been so instrumental in this part of the Blight to Light project. First of all, I want to introduce Dr. Lisa Dickey, who's a professor in the Department of Public Administration and a colleague of the team who will be, and Lisa will be serving as the moderator for the panel. Dr. Simon Andrew is another professor in the Department of Public Administration and has been instrumental in this project. Dr. Sudha Arlakati is a 3rd member of the team, and Dr. Hee-Sung Yong is the 4th member of the team. So Hee-Sung, if you would come up. I also want to mention, because he deserves mentioning in absentia, is Dr. Praveen Mahival, who has been a critical part of this team, and this is indeed a team, and are excited to share the kind of information and discoveries that they have made through this experience.
So to start off, I'd just like to reiterate the title, From Blight to Light. examining blight in the city of Dallas, and we are 4 members of the group. And we really want to thank Dallas Habitat for Humanity, especially Jane, Kristen, Gail, and Cindy. They've been with us throughout from the beginning to the end, and we wouldn't have been able to do it without them. So to start off my presentation, just like to say some of the points that we'd be addressing, objectives and the multi-dimensional concept of blight. We looked at it since the 1930s to the present, how it's been changing. The indicators of blight adopted in 8 major US cities, the physical, social, and the composite index that we've created. Then the cost of blight, we're just going to touch upon it briefly. Our report details it a little bit more, but because of time, just a few things. And then other city interventions, what are they doing, maybe about a couple of cities around the country, what interventions they are trying to adopt to reduce blight. And some of the critical problems that we faced in collecting the data and managing the data, we'd like to just point that out, as well as then the next logical steps that we would like to do and seek funding for. So just the objectives to understand the magnitude of urban blight in the city and to create the composite blight index. So we wanted to really do something that was more visual and pictorial so that it's easy to start conversations amongst the various stakeholders in the city. And also to determine, specifically to determine the cost that the city bears from unpaid liens, demolitions, tax delinquency, crime, court enforcement, etc. And then also in our report, we do include what the city of Dallas is doing as far as the public interventions and also the nonprofits and a little bit about Dallas Morning News, the 10 drops in a bucket. So when you look at the studies, we did an extensive literature review starting from the 1930s, and we just saw that the way people define blight has changed over time. Initially, if you ask anyone what is blight, people will typically say it's a neighborhood where you see broken windows or you see a lot of crime, it looks dilapidated, there's waste everywhere, and so on. So it used to be very much a physical way of looking at blight. And then people started saying, let's also look at the socioeconomic measures, which would be crime and vandalism, and people started measuring quality of life. So do you feel safe? Do you feel that your kids can get a better education? Do you have health system, what do you call those, places that you can seek the doctor and so on. So, and single family or single parent households, female headed households, and all these kinds of indicators started to be incorporated. But what we saw was that most of the studies either took only the physical one or two indicators, or the social measures, and maybe tried to combine them a little bit and at one snapshot in time. So we were charged by Dallas Habitat to try to create an indicator or a measure that could be monitored over time and over a couple of years. So that was our major endeavor. One of the guiding definitions that we use, because there are many definitions of blight, but the one that was provided by Dallas Habitat was neighborhood blight consists of those conditions that threaten the health and safety of neighborhood residents, depress an area's quality of life, and jeopardize the social and economic viability of an area. So we see that this definition sort of encompasses the physical as well as the socioeconomic indicators. And when we asked how y'all came to this, it was just by the experiences that they'd had over the years that the socioeconomic indicators were so important. So this was really our guiding definition, and we've held fast to it. As part of the lit review, we also looked at 8 cities. Now, why we chose these, of course, by doing the search, we just realized some of these cities really were very proactive and the challenges that they faced. So there are many, many cities that have done a lot, and there are lots of initiatives. And the couple of things that we kept looking for was what were the indicators of blight. Now, it's like a chicken and egg kind of situation, what causes blight and what results from that blight, or the indicators of blight and what results from that. And so here is just, our list had about 30 indicators that have been used, 30 or 35, but here, this is just a truncated list that has been popularly used by most of our cities. So we looked at New Orleans, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Oakland, Springfield, Cincinnati, Atlanta, and Philadelphia. So as you'll see this, you find that abandoned vacant buildings, vacant land, vacant properties, foreclosed properties, code compliance issues, median income, declining population, vandalism and crime, unemployment rate, and lien foreclosures. These were some of the most popular ones. And so looking at this, we created our own list of indicators that we first wanted to study. So that list actually had about 20 or 25 indicators, and then we, depending on the data that we could get, we reduced it. So we decided to look at the city, all the counties. There are 5 counties that fall within, the city of Dallas falls within the 5 counties, as you all know: Dallas, Denton, Collin, Kaufman, and Rockville. And there were 383 census tracts, of which 350 were selected for analysis because they fell within the boundaries that we wanted to look at. So as I said, we first had a big list, and then we started looking for data, which was a challenge in itself, because most of us do research where we do face-to-face interviews, survey research. But one of the things that Dallas Habitat told us was this: it has to be secondary data, which is already collected by the city or the county, so that it can be used by different agencies. It could be nonprofits, private sector, public sector. Nobody needs to pay for it. So through open records requests, we did this data collection over a span of about 8 or 9 months. So we had 14 indicators that after taking 25, we cut it down to 14 indicators, which it was just by luck, like 7 physical and 7 socioeconomic. It was not decided to be equal. So the first one was abandoned properties. What we saw in many of the studies and some of the states was that they actually listed abandoned properties on a registry, but this was not available for the city of Dallas. So the other way that City of New Orleans had done this was they had USPS, the U.S. Postal Service collects this data of, if they realize that mail cannot be delivered to an address, they assume that that is abandoned. And so they collect this data for every quarter. So we had that list for every quarter, and we aggregated it for a year. So that was our, and we are not very confident, I wouldn't say confident, we are not very happy with that data. We hope that in the future there'll be a better registry for that. So those were abandoned properties. Then we got a list of vacant residential, vacant commercial properties, mortgage foreclosed, tax foreclosed, tax delinquent, and demolished. And in our report, we actually show the patterns, and we describe the patterns that you observe. But as you can see, the far south and the East Oak Cliff area and Southwest Dallas are the places where physical indicators seem to really project a lot. Then we created a socioeconomic index looking at rate of poverty, unemployment rate, number of Hispanics, because traditionally in other parts of the country, especially a large study in New York was done where they say the attainment level, the social and economic attainment levels for whites are the best, and then followed by Asians, and then followed by Hispanics and blacks. So although in the city of Dallas, Hispanics are not a minority, but considering that they have unequal attainment levels, we decided to go with that number of Hispanics. And then as far as race, we went with the number of non-whites, number of rental, population density, and number of single-parent households. So what we did was we downloaded all this data from the census. All shape files were downloaded used the GIS platform to kind of create, it's like a burger if you don't know how to use GIS, but it's like making a club sandwich or a big burger. So you just layer everything one over the other and try to come up with this kind of index. Now there's no study which says one is bigger than one indicator is more important than the other. So in aggregating, we decided to give all of these indicators equal weights, and so that was what we did. So based on 14 equally weighted blight indicators, we found that 48 of Dallas's 350 census tracts fall in the most blighted areas. That is, although it's only 16% of the city area, it really is a drain on a lot of our city resources, which we'll show a little bit following this. So this is just the different categories. There was no reason why, but we just decided the 4 categories. We could, if somebody wants to go further and get a more nuanced understanding, you might have 10 categories or 6 categories. We chose 4. So we chose no blight, low blight, moderate, and blighted. And looking as a comparison from physical, socioeconomic, and then creating the composite index. So and it's kind of sad, but everyone has to remember this is at the census tract level, so it gets aggregated. So there are no census tracts without any blight. And then low blight, you have 118, moderate is 184, and blighted is 48. So although we've highlighted the 48 in red, we think, of course, the interventions have to be in the blighted areas, but we really need to focus our attention on the moderately blighted areas so that they don't move into blight. And that's a huge amount. That's 184 census tracts. So just to look at the different cost calculations, so once we created this index, we went back to each of the physical indicators, because social, you cannot actually change somebody's race or ethnicity, or you can't, poverty status, you may be able to change over time, but what can the city do? And so looking at these various layers that we used, or characteristics that we used to codify physical indicators, we started with delinquent property tax cost. And so what we found was that, again, when we had the number of delinquent properties, they were mapped on the whole city. And we found that 41% is in the 48 high blight tracts, 49% is in the 184 moderate blight tracts, and 10% is in the 118 low blight tracts. So we really need to look at the first two rows. So what does that mean? Delinquent property taxes, based on the property tax revenue report, of course, here are some of the challenges that we face. We don't have, maybe the city has a better number, but we looked at the secondary source data, so the reports were available. There were total residential parcels in 2011 were 291,592. And then we looked at the assessed market value. We also looked at the total property taxes levied, and of that, how much is uncollected. So this is an important number to see over time. We did get the list or the data from 1964 to 2011, 2010, but there was some problem in trying to match the addresses. And so we limited it from 1994 to 2010. So the percentage of uncollected property taxes is about 1.9% if you average it over 17 years. And evidence suggests that between 1994 to 2010, the rate of property tax delinquency, so people not paying their property taxes, people are not able to collect that, the city is unable to collect it, is almost 3.17% a year, which is quite a high number if you try to calculate it in dollar figures. This is one of the most important problems, as the mayor suggested, as well as Bill, non-tax lien cost. And what does this mean? So if the person you have absentee landowners, they've left the home and it's not in a good condition, so the city has to actually go in and mow or clean and demolish if there's fire and so on, and they try to claim it from the property owners, but if they are missing, then it's a lien on their property. So between 2010 to 2012, the city issued about 10,473 citations and filed 10.2 million in non-tax liens. And on an average, 86% of those liens are unpaid. This is really a big number, totaling 8.79 million in unpaid liens for just 3 years alone. We only got data for the 3 years. Actually had to go and somebody had to program the query that we had. So this is another data that we hope the city will continue to collect regularly and actually program and have available for future research. 55% of the non-tax liens were filed in the 48 high blight census tracts. So that's, again, quite a startling finding. And 44% addresses have multiple citations. That is another thing that is very, very important. It's just not one citation, but some of the properties had as many as 12 citations in a year. And it could be citation for not mowing the lawn or for not boarding up your windows. And because it is, it affects the security, health, safety of the whole neighborhood, or they've dumped a car and so on. 21.7%, that is almost 2,000 addresses, have citations every year, which is again something to look into. So this just gives you over time, and we've aggregated people who are repeat offenders or repeat violators 2, 3, and 4. So almost 3,554 addresses had repeat violations over time. We also did a logistic regression, and we found that if you kept everything, so the age of the property, the condition that it is in, the year it was built, if you kept all that constant, on average, a vacant property is 26 times more likely to have an outstanding non-tax lien, and 4.6 times more likely to have multiple citations per year. So really, vacancy is something we need to tackle as quickly as possible, vacancy and abandonment. The other drain on the city is the demolition costs. We think that if it's unsightly, let's go and demolish it. The city can decide, can spend some money. So we got a list of all the properties that were demolished from between 2007 to 2011. There were 1,596 residential and commercial properties. Then we got a list of how much it costs for demolishing a property and how much is quoted by the private contractors that the city actually contracts with. And so the cost is between $0.8 to $3.5 for a square foot. But demolition has so many different criteria. It could be wet demolition, it could be dry demolition, it could be also, if there's some kind of abatement, they need to do asbestos abatement, the cost really increases. And we didn't put all that into account. So this is a really conservative calculation that we did. So of all these demolitions, 410 residential properties cost the city an estimated $1.6 million. Almost half of that cost, 47%, was attributable to the 48 high blight census tracts. The next one is code compliance costs. So we have people who do this every day in and out, and I know they know the challenges. We just found it. We just found these numbers. I hope it's as accurate as we could get. So the number of civil, the way code compliance does it is divided into civil and criminal. And what we were told is if they can find the homeowner and identify who the homeowner is, then it's a criminal violation, the criminal code violation. So it's the same thing, same items. So there were about 6,072 civil code citations given out, and criminal code were 2,501. So we didn't have the budget and how much they spent, so we again used the budget data that was on the annual report. And we found that neighborhood code compliance services budget was given here, and the total citations was 8,573. And so just projecting a cost per violation, the city spends about 1,800. And that's a big number when it quickly adds on trying to take care of this code compliance issue. And the other calculation we did was code enforcement cost per square mile in the in the blighted, moderate, and low blight. Again, you see about $60,000 in the blighted areas, and then moderate blight is not too bad, and low blight. So again, to look at those blighted communities. Police service costs, we really didn't get the budget. Again, we looked at the secondary data, the budget sheets that were available. The total violent crimes and the non-violent crimes were reported, and we aggregated that number and then looked at the crime prevention management budget from the police department, the Dallas Police Department, and found that the projected average cost per criminal violation, that is rape and murder and so on, is about $4,200 to go there and handle all that. So the 48 high blight census tracts represent only 16% of total Dallas area, but about 30% of total violent crimes in the city of Dallas. And that's a huge drain and resource that the police department uses. So law enforcement in blighted, you can see their efforts are really concentrated on the blighted communities, 900,000, and then the moderate blight, 611,000. So if we could make these neighborhoods safer, the cost would go down tremendously. So just that was just a snapshot. I don't know if I'm going too fast, but how much time do I? Okay. Other city initiatives. So we just gave a little bit of a brief about how the costs are from various, from liens, from demolitions, from police costs, and so on. But some of the city initiatives that we found to be interesting is that New Haven has a foreclosure task force to offer preventive assistance to at-risk households by referring them to no-cost services. Louisville, Kentucky operates the foreclosure prevention initiative to connect distressed borrowers with professional counselors, very much like what a Habitat does when they build a home. Then they make sure that they counsel the people about repaying the money and so on. Chicago uses an innovative redevelopment tool to allow neighbors to purchase, and we think this is a very important method. Neighbors to purchase vacant city-owned lots for less than market value. So if your property is really good and clean, but your neighbor has just abandoned it, you should be given the opportunity to purchase it at a much lower price so that you can maybe use that land for your family and mow it and keep it, maintain it as best you can. Minneapolis provides forgivable loans to home buyers purchasing homes in blighted neighborhoods. So that's another initiative. Maybe in the long run, that is really going to help out. New Orleans exercises proactive expropriation power to acquire blighted properties. This is interesting because before Katrina, they had about 20,000 properties, but after Katrina, about 100,000 were abandoned, and they quickly realized that they had to do something as best they could. So they used their police power or expropriation power. But one of the recent studies by Harvard says that one of the stipulations, because Louisiana has changed their takings clause, one of the stipulations is that even if the city acquires that, they cannot sell it to a third party or a private investor. So that might be a challenge. So even if the city of Dallas wanted to do something like this, the verbiage on that clause has to be really well thought out. Springfield, Massachusetts has issued a $1.8 million demolition bond to remove properties for properties abandoned for years. So that's something that can be looked at. And then Philadelphia, Minneapolis, and Albuquerque have registries to track boarded and vacant properties. We thought this was really important because as of now, it's almost impossible to track abandoned properties. Atlanta Fulton County Land Bank has the power to waive all delinquent property taxes on parcels of land acquired. Cleveland Land Bank has the ability to cancel delinquent taxes on acquired property. And St. Louis Problem Property Unit aggressively pursues unpaid liens the city incurs for the upkeep of vacant properties. So a lot of initiatives by other cities, and we could take some of them and try to tweak them to meet our needs. One of the things that we would like to present is that this decision support, what we are trying to do, we've created a tool, but other cities are creating decision support software which can quickly give you the data. So Philadelphia has conducted a comprehensive survey of vacant properties and created a decision support model to prioritize blight properties. So then they tackle blight according to the priority areas. So we could also do that with high blight areas and then moderate. Portland uses digital orthophotographs and aerial images and GIS data to categorize land as vacant, partly vacant, or developed, and then they keep monitoring how it changes over time. New Orleans uses mapping technology to identify blight locations and levels to strengthen code enforcement, something similar to what we are trying to do here. And Baltimore has built a property management tool by consolidating real estate records and GIS data. So one of the challenges we had when we were trying to calculate the cost was we could not get real estate data. We could not get the sales price anywhere. It was almost impossible because that would have made a lot of meaningful, given us a lot of meaningful results to be able to do a distance-based analysis showing that what's the cost of this property that was sold, and over time, or the properties next to it, they're losing out money and so on. But we did not get that data available. So some of the data recommendations, non-tax liens, a better system for monitoring non-tax labor liens for understanding their cost to the city. So what we really are looking for, or we were looking for, was the addresses and the type of lien that they had, and then the repeat violators, how many times the same address was violating. Right now we didn't get it by address, we just got an aggregate number annually and over time. And then abandoned properties, using the United States Postal Service data was, we think, not very adequate, so maybe create a registry for abandonment, and we can see. Code compliance adjudication costs. This was something we really wanted to, but we did not know how much it takes. So we need to maintain an easily accessible database of the number of cases filed for people who have not been compliant, and then adjudicated, and how much it costs the city for that. So that really adds up to the cost. So all the cost calculations that we have done are actually an underestimation, we feel. And then consistency in data collection. A lot of times we found that the county had a certain code which was not mirrored in the city database, and so we actually lost out a lot of cases because we couldn't do it, we couldn't map them. So in conclusion, we think we've just started this process. We've created this composite blight index. It provides a visual representation of blight by census tracts. And I know a lot of community activists and interested citizens were worried. I got so many phone calls saying that we really don't live in blight, and I told them that it is aggregated at the census tract. So the further steps would be to go down to a more micro level and study it at a neighborhood. So looking at successful neighborhoods that have worked together with different partners and neighborhoods that are not successful, and so more at a micro level. This is much at an aggregated level. And we need to target our interventions, of course, on the blighted areas, but also on the moderately blighted areas. We have been able to demonstrate in a very briefly what the cost is. I'm sure the city of Dallas can take it many steps further to make sure things are working out. And then this can be updated. This is a baseline index, and we've used all the data which is freely available and census tract data, so it can be monitored over time. You can replicate it. We've submitted the codes that we used, and the whole system is with Habitat, so anybody else can take it from them. And then gauge the impact of blight reduction policies. We can also try to do that. So maybe 2 years from now, we can say that if we've done something for improving code compliance, has it improved over time in that particular neighborhood? And the biggest challenge is that we don't have thresholds. And so that's one of the limitations. There's no way for us to set a threshold that if so many are non-compliant, then we move to blight and so on. So that's another conversation to be had. So the next steps, we hope, subject to receiving funding, is use each of the 7 physical indicators to identify degrees of risk in moderate and high blight census tracts. So when we say identify degrees of risk, that's where I'm saying we mean the thresholds. That is it 20% are or 50% are non-compliant, so that is blight, or so different degrees, and then try to reduce the risk as much as possible. We want to use the Dallas Central Appraisal District's coding that they use for poor and moderate and average, all that kind of thing on the physical structure. We want to use that with the blight categories and try to match it with the assessed land value and see if it speaks to us and gives us more information about what can be done in certain neighborhoods. The third one, very important one, which was already alluded to by the mayor, is analyze the likelihood of properties having greater non-tax liens owing to absentee property owners. And that's a big issue. Somebody in California could be absent, and then the city has to keep spending money to try to for the upkeep of the plot. So we want to do a distance-based analysis on the residential address of the owner and the property with the non-tax liens. And then the fourth one, interesting one, which we would like to do, is analyze the relationship between code enforcement citations with non-homestead exempted addresses. So if you own a home, clearly you take care of it better, but if it is rental and it's not homestead, so it'll serve as a proxy for rental properties. So that's it for us. We really appreciate all the assistance, and we really appreciate your attention in this matter, and we hope to answer all the questions. There are some note cards on the table. If you don't want to come up here and ask your question, give us the questions and with your contact address, and we'll be very happy to answer it by email. Thank you very much.
Well, as moderator, I get the easy job because I am trying to keep time a little bit. I know we have a lot of people here who have questions and a relatively short period of time. So we'll try to get to as many of them as we possibly can. But again, as Dr. Arlicati mentioned, there are cards on your table, and if you don't want to stand up and ask your question, please do write out your question, and those cards will come up to me, and I can at least ask the question for you, or we can get back in touch with you if we can't get to all the questions. But I do want to thank the panel, the research team, and if it's all right, I'd like to start with just one question, and I mean, again, you give me a microphone and an opportunity to ask questions, I could be here all day, so don't be afraid to put a hand up. But the quick question I'm going to ask is, one of the things that I thought was really great about this particular study was that it offered these maps. It offered a means and a way of measuring blight, whether it's the best way to measure blight or whether it's, we can talk about those things, but the fact of the matter is they've created a tool that could be used by the city of Dallas or any other city to try to measure blight. Now, in and of itself, that's important, but I think the most important thing about that is it also offers you an opportunity to try things, initiatives, and work together to try to create and reduce blight. So the issue here is, can you replicate the study? And if you can replicate the study, you can show whether various interventions are going to help in reducing blight or changing or pulling certain tracts, for example, out of heavily blighted to less blighted areas. So my question to the panel, and even though Dr. Arlicati made this great presentation, anyone is open to questions. The question is, what data are needed, in your opinion, by cities in order to be able to replicate the study and be able to measure blight in their communities and over time map changes in blight conditions?
My name is Simon Andrew. I'm one of the research team here. I think one of the things that we have to bear in mind when we're trying to develop this index is that it has to be quite consistent across what unit of analysis is going to be, whether it's at the census tract or is it going to be at the neighborhood level or whatever that's available across time. I think that's the constraint that we have as a researcher in how consistent the data might be. The one that we have chosen to do is at the census tract because the availability of data are there. For other cities, or like city of Dallas, the physical indicator such as abandoned property is very difficult to gather. I mean, in the sense that you have to quickly email the UPS to give us the data, and they are also constrained by legal issues that they have to consider. There are other indicators too, like whether the water supply has been switched off. Those can be also used as a proxy, but then again we have to consider about some constraints that you have. So you have to be kind of like quite creative in thinking about what are the indicators of abandonment, or whether it's a switch off of electricity, water supply, to get some sense about the general picture. That's one example. I don't think it limits to what we already provided to the Habitat for Humanities. We've been brainstorming a lot on proxies, best way of indicators. But there are data out there, I think, and these data, as long as they are available across time and at the unit of analysis, I think it can be used to create this index. I think it depends upon the priority of a particular city. And their concern also, elected officials as well as appointed officials are concerned about that.
As we presented about other cities how to deal with this data of identification of area abandoned and vacant. Cities like Minneapolis, Philadelphia, and Albuquerque are running the registration program, require property owners to pay their registrations. Like City of Minneapolis had like the $2,000 for the registry, and like they raise up to $6,000 to discourage their abandonment of these housings. So it is a good kind of way to keep the track of those vacant houses and the properties, And on top of that, they can find a way to discourage those homeowners to leave their house like the taken. So that would be a good way to collect.
Are there questions out in the room? If you just put, yes, in the back, please, your hand up.
My name is Yolanda Columbus, and first of all, I want to thank you for the research. I work at the University of North Texas at Dallas, and we're doing it at a smaller level with each community. That being said, our work and your work, there's a question that arises. When we're looking at the social index, you listed the number of minorities as one of the components of the index. It raised some concern from the standpoint of if we're working in a community and blight is no longer blight, the number of minorities is not going to change. So could you talk about the impact of looking at the number of minorities rather than perhaps the trends that are usually common to those populations?
Great questions, Yolanda, right? Thank you. The way we created the index, we made sure that we built in some redundancy. So we looked at racial composition as well as minorities. Now, and as I mentioned, that in Dallas they are not a minority, but in other parts of the country they are. We also look at single family, single parent households and so on. So as long as in your index, if you're creating an index, you see that if it's changing, then and just ensure that you enter that data as over time. Does that answer it or no?
Not really.
No, what is, so are you saying that it's changing over time in your?
No, I'm saying that the number of Hispanics, the number of blacks, the number of minorities may be the same, but
Okay.
blight may no longer be a problem. And so what is the impact of the social index if we're looking at those trends rather than looking at those numbers rather than the trends that are sometimes common in those populations, which is low educational attainment or income, rather than those trends, looking at those trends rather than just the number of Hispanics.
That's an interesting question. I think one of the things that I would do in that situation is probably do some sensitivity analysis in the sense that I will do, let's say that 1 year you did not take that into account, like what we did not take into account. I will run that one. I also take into account what you have said in terms of the changes of the composition and how the physical indicator might have changed, and see how much changes that might have occurred to get some sense about the impact of the changes of the physical characteristic as opposed to the socioeconomic characteristics. Does that make sense? So you hold one constant, what you hold as a benchmark, and then at the same time you say, okay, I'm going to do some sensitivity, and because I notice that the physical indicator has changed and make to a much better situation, I will then control for that and see the differences of the changes that you have. In order to kind of like, okay, you can't move back. We can't kind of like move 2010 while you're doing the analysis 2011 or 12, but you can hold that constant and see the rate of change that might have occurred because of the changes of the physical characteristics of your index. Now, the index is quite flexible enough that you can do that, but it depends upon what type of changes that you want to foresee. Does that make sense? Yes.
I think the question is, why put race in the index instead of education and other indicators? So I think the question is there a way to substitute race for other indicators?
Yeah, you definitely can. And first we thought of the school dropout rates and so on. We couldn't get that. Otherwise, that was one of the indicators that we had selected. But you can replace and you can make the index your own, whichever way. Because subsequent to this, we found in some of the studies they've looked at immigration status and whether you are American, like you were born here or you're an immigrant and how many years, and that has also an impact. So probably just taking a blanket race by itself might not really give, or just ethnicity might not. So thanks, Nikki.
Yes.
I found your maps difficult to decipher. They're small, they're in PDF format. Is there a chance that these will be released in Google Earth or something like that we can get a better look at specific neighborhoods rather than trying to figure out what is what on the system?
The maps we've created are all in a PDF version. We can give a JPEG version, but you cannot actually go in to it at a smaller scale. That would have to be done later on. So you can create the same, you can blow up the same map to a larger size, but not to the scale where you go into, not like Google Earth. And that would require much more data at a much finite level to be done. Would it help if you just blew it up to a huge size?
No, not really, because it's not.
No, and yeah, so the whole data is just at the census tract level. So we've had contacts with certain cities, and they are asking us for certain neighborhoods, and so we told them which layers we use. You could create it in-house if you had if you're a citizen, I'm sorry, but if you were in the public sector and a private sector, they could create it using the layers that we have.
Well, if you had a classroom full of students, they
Yes, they could.
Thank you. Yes.
I was curious, have you put together a budget for the additional research that you want to do? And if you have you broken it down by the tasks that you have set forth that you would like to pursue?
Yes, we have.
And could you tell us what that budget is?
No, we can't, because it would depend on, the first budget we gave was for Dallas, because Dallas Habitat, because of our relationship with them. Now it depends on the highest bidder.
There's that community spirit. Yeah. Question here.
I have a question. Did the study data include both residential and commercial, or just residential properties?
For vacant, the particular maps we created, it was vacant residential and vacant commercial, but most other things, it was only residential. We try to see, because for vacancy, we could get enough cases, but with mortgage foreclosures and other things that we use for the layers, we didn't get enough commercial properties with addresses that we could geocode, so then we stuck to residential.
Yes.
In determining whether a property was vacant, were you looking just at DCAT and looking at the owner and whether or not the address matched up with the property, or how were you determining whether it was vacant?
How were you determining vacancy?
You're supposed to
Repeat the
Yes,
question.
no, how was vacancy determined in the study?
Right.
Yeah, vacancy was from the DCAT data, and so Praveen is not here, but he used the list that we got from DCAT and looking at how many were owned, how did he say in the columns, people were living there and not, and so on. I don't know the data set the way he pulled it up in GIS. But
I guess my question was focusing on that because I was wondering whether with that original data that you were getting from DCAT, was there the possibility that you had someone who owned that property but was renting it out and it was not vacant, that it was actually occupied, it's just that the owner...
No, I don't think so. I think it declares it as vacant. There is nobody living there. I don't think it's ambiguous at all, that particular data set.
Maybe one more question? Yes.
Ben Houston, outside of Habitat for Humanity, in your studies, did you come across the top one or two things that converted a property from blighted to not being blighted?
Were there some things that you encountered in the research that converted things from being blighted to not being blighted?
I would say the trends, I think the New Orleans study is a great one, where they expropriated the properties and they were able to convert it, but then the city was able to either give it over to a third party and convert it for better use, but we didn't monitor that, but that's one of the methods. And the other one was where they allowed the neighbors to purchase it. So these were small, I wouldn't say anybody has done it over time to have seen whether it has changed, but these were some small mechanisms that they're using.
The cities like Minneapolis and Cleveland, there's the Fulton County and City of Atlanta have very innovative way to make this redevelopment very attractive for potential developers by waiving delinquent property taxes. because even though it is like a sale of $500, it comes with much more, like much larger size of delinquent property taxes. But the problem is the legal authority is mostly state authority, should be achieved by the city and the citizen group to give better kind of shape for the city to expedite the process of redevelopment. So City of Cleveland, their kind of approach to just to cancel all of like the delinquent property taxes has been cited in many ways as a successful program.
Well, thank you all for your questions. Again, if you have a question that did not get answered, please feel free to fill out the note card and some contact information, email something that we can get back to you, and the research team can look at that and provide some answers. But thank you very much for your attention. There is a 10-minute break, and then come back, everyone, please.